We'll begin the next session. The next session is about racial polarization and contact theory. You've heard both teams and the science team talk extensively about contact theory. It's a very specific concept that is important to both plans and is important to the idea of how do we bring people together to deal with polarization issues. Mr. Manix White will talk about racial polarization and contact theory. Mr. White.
Thank you, Your Honor. As mentioned, I'm going to be discussing contact theory as a part of the second psychology session. Contact theory occurs when different social groups make contact with each other, especially when the contact is facilitated and cooperative. And when this happens, we see that in almost every case, prejudice between the groups is reduced. As an overview, contact requires, for contact to be effective, it requires an interaction between multiple social groups, which could be racial, religious, or ethnic, and I'll go through a more comprehensive list in a short minute. It's been studied for a very long time, dating back to the 30s, and it has been shown over the years to be extremely reliable, though the effects are sometimes small. So I'm going to start out by looking at this graph, and I'm going to direct your attention to the upper left corner, and we see that the populations that are studied are most often young adults, which is generally the target population of the programs that both the pro and the con team are proposing. And then at the top middle here, we see all of the different kinds of groups that are targeted during contact interactions, including age, disability, nationality, gender, sexuality, race, and religion. And so this graph here is an analysis of 27 different studies done in this field. And we see that every study that is above this line, which is at 0, all of these, which is 24 out of 27 of the studies, is above this line. All of these studies showed a positive impact on prejudice in following contact, which means that prejudice was reduced following contact. And as you go farther away from this line and higher up on the graph, that means that prejudice was reduced to a greater degree. And I'm going to, in order to paint a more concrete picture of what contact can look like, I'm going to be focusing on 4 studies that were included in this analysis and share with you how these were conducted. Most of them involve long-term contact occurring usually between weeks and a year. For example, one of them integrated special needs students into other classes, and they found that the other students had more positive attitudes towards the special needs students when compared to the non-integrated classrooms. College students who have roommates who are a different race find that they are more likely to then make other friends who are outside of their own racial group. Employing a worker with a disability in a school improves the attitudes of that worker's supervisors and coworkers towards people with disabilities. And enrolling in a racially heterogeneous course can improve a person's racial tolerance. And I'm going to dive into this study a little bit deeper. And this example took place in an outward bound course, or actually a number of outward bound courses. And students who were in high school participated in these courses for 2 to 3 weeks, and they were divided into homogeneous and heterogeneous groups. And they found that in response to questions after these courses, which are very rigorous, they involve a lot of character building and learning with a focus in the outdoors. It's a very intensive course that requires a lot of collaboration. They found that the homogeneous group responded out of 5 on average with a 3.4 on the index of racial tolerance. And the students who were in the heterogeneous courses that included multiple ethnic backgrounds, students of multiple ethnic backgrounds responded on average 4.3 on the index of racial tolerance. And these are out of 5. And the researchers found that this was, in fact, a significant difference, which I think is evident. Some other conditions that are beneficial to the effectiveness of contact, but they are not necessary, are working towards a common goal, cooperation between groups, equal status among all of the participants, and support or facilitation from an institution, which is the most important. It improves the result in reducing prejudice to the greatest degree. Some other important conditions that can, that when these are present, prejudice is reduced even more are the reduction of anxiety. So experiments or studies where measures were taken to mitigate anxiety between the groups found stronger correlations between their contact and the reduction of prejudice. When empathy is fostered, prejudice is reduced more. And when members of the study are able to take the perspective of members of the other group, prejudice is reduced. And also when a common identity may be fostered through contact, which, as I discussed earlier, can further reduce prejudices. It's important to know for whom contact is most effective, and it has been shown to reduce prejudice both for the majority and the minority group in a contact situation. However, the effects are stronger for the majority groups. And this is seen here. The average correlation between the contact and prejudice for those of minority status is of a lesser magnitude, and the negative here just means that contact or that prejudice was reduced. So the magnitude is lesser for those who are a member of the minority group than for those who are a member of the majority group. However, there is still a correlation that we're looking for. It's simply just not as strong. There are some generalizations that we can make as a result of contact. Contact with an outgroup may reduce prejudice towards the entire group as opposed to simply the people you're interacting with. And it can also reduce prejudice towards other groups. So maybe a study is looking at interactions between different ethnic groups, and they find that prejudice is reduced between the ethnic groups. And if they ask them about their tolerance for different religious groups, they might also find that their prejudice is reduced to a certain degree. However, these effects are also not as strong. So here's another table with the correlations. And so when you look at the result of contact on prejudice with only the people with whom the contact is made, you see that it's rather strong. The magnitude is larger when you look at it, the comparison to when you look at the entire group that is being studied, not just the people that are a part of the study. It is slightly lower, but it is still relatively strong. And then when you look at the correlation involving other social groups, as I mentioned before, when a study looks at ethnicity and then they ask questions about religion, it's going to be still a correlation that we're looking for, but again, the magnitude is not as strong. And some key takeaways for this presentation are that contact can reliably reduce prejudice between groups. Contact is best when it makes use of time, goals, cooperation, equality, support, and empathy. The reduction of prejudice from contact may be generalized outside of the immediately present groups, though the effects are not as strong. And the effectiveness of contact is not as strong for minority group members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very important subject. We'll have questions from the pro and con legal teams, and we also have some important questions from the jury that we will ask as well. So we're looking forward to all of those questions and this discussion. Mr. Bremner, questions from the pro team.
Thank you, Your Honor. I only have one very simple question. So you described would bringing people together in this type of service program, in a mandatory service program for an extended period of time, would that be compatible with your findings on contact theory?
Yes, absolutely. Bringing together a heterogeneous group of people is the hallmark of contact theory. And yes, I believe that would be compatible.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Sapathy.
Thank you, Your Honor. Manix, thank you for your presentation. I have one question. Do you think that the effects of contact theory are permanent? Like if you were to group people together in a program once and they don't go forward with it, will the positive impacts of contact theory persist permanently?
I tried very hard to find research on this, but I wasn't able to find anything with the long-term effects. But I think that the fact that you can generalize some of the effects to groups that are not part of the immediate study is promising.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
I have jury questions here. For both program representatives, Mr. Bremner and Mr. Sympathy, here is the question from the jury. Would each program identify how that particular program can fulfill the 4 conditions specified as being necessary for contact theory to be effective? And if we need to, maybe Mr. White could display those conditions, that slide again, identifying those 4 conditions that apply to contact theory. And if both Mr. Bremner and Sympathy in turn could identify how their program works towards satisfying those conditions.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. So as we mentioned, this is the primary driving force behind every service proposal that will come up, because when you're thinking of this idea of a mandatory service program, it is essentially just a good means of producing of contact theory that benefits the country as well. So if you're, let's just take the example of an infrastructure improvement. Let's say you're building a house. You would have teams that are heterogeneous working towards a common goal of building that house. You would, to ensure equal status among participants, that would be ensured by the authority figures running the service program, who obviously would be there to support and facilitate interaction. And forcing them to cooperate, that is, again, just a part of the underlying structure of every program. Just being able to put people in teams where they have to work together to build this one wall. I don't know much about construction personally, I won't lie. That's build this, or like working together on this, or if you're if you're in something educational, and let's say you're working with children, you're trying to tutor, having to work together to try and like help a child understand an idea is kind of forcing that cooperation and forcing working towards a common identifiable goal that is good, that is satisfies a public need. You're trying to assist the community, you're trying to assist the country in a goal. And yes, through that interaction. And as I said, every program that would be proposed in our mandatory service program would be, so you would submit a proposal and you would have to detail, like explain how you would include all ports conditions. If you are not able to do that, your program would not receive funding to end up being a part of this larger national service program. Your service opportunity would not become a part of the larger system if you cannot explain how you're going to implement these. Because as I said, this whole thing exists as a means of creating contact with these conditions, and the ability to build a national identity by serving your country and the ability to benefit the country, those are huge pluses. But this is the key.
Thank you, Mr. Bremner. Mr. Supathy, could you respond to the same issue of how does the voluntary program incorporate the all ports conditions? And in particular, one of the jury questions is directed to the specific issue is with voluntary plans, how do you avoid people self-segregating and avoiding those conditions because it's voluntary, and therefore people may in effect volunteer in a way or self-segregate in a way that does not meet those conditions and does not address polarization. Mr. Supathy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think our program, especially as part of our program, we are offering a multitude of objectives. If you want to if you want to be part of a program which has a humanitarian focus or has a focus on technical skill development, at the end of the day, people who are taking part in the program are all focused on one single goal, be it being it contributing to society or taking part, excuse me, for programs which are encouraging skill development. So that common goal which is established between in the program will motivate people to take part in it and focus on attaining that goal. When it comes to cooperation between groups, we want to emphasize the fact that our program will not be some sort of lecture-based program, and we will ensure that the vetting process for programs which will take part in our service program will not be seminar-based or lecture-based, but something where it involves people to take part in a group project or take part in community service. Like as a computer science student myself, I understand how important it is to be part of a team and to work together. Not only so that the task it's not only that it is more efficient, but also because it allows people to help each other and uplift each other. And that is what we want to focus on in our program. In terms of the status between participants, we don't discriminate in terms of age and terms of community, and we want to bring together people from both ends of the spectrum to take part, depending on their priorities and what they want from the program. And in terms of facilitation from an institution, as I mentioned in my opening statement, our program will ensure that there is a very unbiased set of facilitators who encourage a very positive interaction between people. Now, with respect to the follow-up question you mentioned, Your Honor, we believe that like our voluntary program, since it prioritizes the fact of safe spaces and provides people with the opportunity to interact with one another, would encourage them to take part in it. if you are part of the BIPOC community, and you have traditionally been part of communities which are not very conducive to in terms of diversity, providing the opportunity to take part in these programs which are heterogeneous in nature would encourage them to participate. And also, beyond that, with our variable incentives, which vary from program to program and participation to participation, that will, in the overall sense, it will incentivize people to, while yes, we're giving you the opportunity to make your choice, it also gives you an ample amount of incentives to take part in programs which involve a very diverse group.
Thank you very much. An additional jury question, again, for both Mr. Bremner and Mr. Sepathy. How are you going to create these heterogeneous groups in your program that meet those conditions of blending people together? Are people going to have to register or declare this? And this applies particularly in the voluntary program, but it also applies to the program as well. As how are you going to identify these things? Some things may be easily identified, such as skin color, but other things such as political allegiance are not as easily identified. So could both program representatives identify in a little more detail how some of these important heterogeneous groups crossing all these boundaries can be created? Mr. Bremner.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. So, as you said, our program would incorporate something similar to a type of registration, kind of just more of a type of like survey with some required information, similar to something you would see on like a college application in terms of like basically allowing participants to like encouraging participants to include as much information about themselves as they can, including political affiliation, including race, including geography, and like there will be yes, so even if we can't necessarily nail down something that's not a provable fact, like an address or something that's such as concrete as race, like in terms of like political ideology, that doesn't mean that we're left with nothing. There are a lot of trends and things that we can follow in the United States, knowing demographics, knowing trends, to try and incorporate different types of people in the hopes and the assumption that different types of political beliefs will be there. For example, if you're going to include maybe like a white person from rural America, like you might not, if you have a group of them, you might not necessarily, you could potentially know, you can't 100% know that all of them may be conservative, but you can probably guess that many of them may be. And if you're going to take maybe people of color from an urban area, or just anybody from different demographics, different areas, you are able to at least attempt, and probably with relative success, incorporate people of different political beliefs, even if that information isn't explicitly provided, but we would encourage participants to do so for our ease, essentially.
Mr. Sympathy.
Yes, I think that's a really great question, and I think that is a focal point of how exactly we will be structuring our voluntary program. And as I addressed in my opening statement, it is a very pressing question, and it is an issue on the forefront as to how to guarantee a very large pool of people participating in it, in terms of both educational background, in terms of employment, and in terms of their ethnicity. So as Andrew mentioned, we will also be having a registration system in terms of where we will be asking you questions about your ethnicity, about in terms of which state and which part of the state you live in. And we believe we would steer a little further away from not asking explicitly about their political affiliation, as that's often a variable, a very is not a very definite answer to it, but we believe in some form of essay-like questions where we try to provide situational questions for people to probably propagate their perspective. We would be able to get information about the applicants and who want to participate. Furthermore, these after we get a registration and we get a pool of people, this pool will be analyzed by a group of academic professionals in the form of a committee, which would automatically make sure that we have a group of people, we have a diverse group of people, not in the sense that you have one BIPOC person in a group which is predominantly Caucasian, but also to ensure that there is a proportion of people relevant in terms of rurality or being in urban cities, or in terms of ethnicity, or in terms of the political affiliation which they might be communicating from their answers in their essay questions.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll now have statements from both the pro and con legal teams. Mr. Bremner, your statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, having heard my question to Manix, having heard what I've said in previous sessions, and having heard what I've said in my opening statement, you likely have an idea of where I'm going with my statement on contact theory and racial polarization. That our proposal is strong because we can pull Americans from different backgrounds. I am stressing that point, and I'm doing so because it's important. Our goal is to reduce polarization. If we create an excellent program that provides many things, but doesn't reduce polarization, we failed in our goal. And this is how we're going to do it: contact theory. This is the foundation. It's the primary tool to fight polarization that we have built our entire proposal around. It is our top priority in designing each service program that we make sure all of the conditions of contact theory are met. But if the intergroup contact isn't there, what's the point? What we are offering with mandatory service is a guarantee of this contact. With a voluntary program, you can create incentives and hope that you can attract all the people you want for this program, and you may. But at the end of the day, you simply don't know. You don't know that the conditions to fight polarization in the best way possible will be met. And we do. And that's why I stress this, because the ability to engage everyone matters at the core of this issue, and is what makes our proposal so strong, and is why that is what should be implemented in the US. Thank you.
Mr. Sympathy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think as part of, as the pro side just mentioned, that the voluntary program is faced with that issue of saying that we don't know how many people will participate, and in terms of how many people will really get together. And that is a very, very valid point. And that is something which we center in our proposal, that we want to tackle that issue. And we address the fact that because it's a voluntary program, people may not want to participate. But that is why we try to understand in terms of, and we try to put ourselves in the place of Americans and understand, what is important to them. We understand that the quality of life is important, a progress in their career, a good quality of life, a safe community, and above all, a freedom to choose. And that is what we centered our program around. In terms of incentives, we provide a variable set of incentives and a very widespread incentives focusing on education, employment, and healthcare, which is way more than just a stipend, which you may have missed out because you are part of a program for a certain amount of time. We want to look at it in the long term. And in terms of the contact theory, we are making use of using contact theory in our idea of creating a safe and dynamic space for people to interact with one another. Because American society is so focused and it is so critical that the freedom of choice is present in society, we believe that even though the question of whether how many people will participate is more of an I don't know, but making sure we give people the freedom of choice coupled with the right type of incentives and would attract people from a wide spectrum of the population, be it someone looking to progress in their government education, to progress in the graduate education, or someone who's looking for employment and are looking for a way to develop their skills, or someone who's looking to improve their healthcare. We believe humanizing these incentives would encourage people to participate, and coupled with our safe space experience and having a group of facilitators who would help and who would help that program who would help that safe space to be maintained, we believe our program will be able to attract the right amount of people and the maximum participation we need to combat polarization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes this particular session, and we've now arrived at the stated time for lunch, and we'll take a break for lunch. Professor Tadmore, do you have anything to add on administrative matters? I think we'd still ask people to not leave the session, but to stay active in this webinar session so that we don't have problems with people rejoining. Professor Tadmore. You're muted, Professor Tadmore.
Thank you. That's going to be the refrain from the COVID days. You're muted. Yeah, no, I had nothing to add to that. I just wanted to show my face again and say, you know, how impressed I was with all the presentations so far this morning, and looking forward to the afternoon. So we're taking 30 minutes for lunch and regrouping at 12:30. Please leave the webinar running so we don't have any technical difficulties, but that's it.